For the Updating the Canon project, I read the multicultural novel The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros, and here's my literary review. The basic narrative arc of this novel begins with the exposition when Esperanza and her family move to Mango Street. The rising action is a series of events and experiences that Esperanza goes through as she matures sexually and emotionally into a young woman. The climax of the story is when Esperanza is raped by a group of boys at the festival in the chapter Red Clowns. The falling action is kind of Esperanza's beginning to accept that Mango Street is her home and it is where she is from. And she does so with the help of Alicia and three sisters at Lucy and Rachel's sister's funeral. And the resolution is kind of this realization that she has that her stories that she writes allow her to escape Mango Street. And although she may leave one day, she decides that she will come back for those she has left behind and for those who have no way out. So, characterization. Esperanza is the narrator and the protagonist of the story. She's a young Latina who doesn't want to live in the house on Mango Street and experiences this sense of dissatisfaction. Because of her dissatisfaction caused by the expectations and dreams that she had for this house on Mango Street in her life, she begins this quest for self-definition. In this quest, it leads her to mature sexually and emotionally. Cisneros writes this story in Esperanza's point of view, and by doing so, she's able to reveal how naive Esperanza is, and the shift that she experiences in her maturity and her loss of innocence as she journeys from childhood to adulthood, and in this quest for self-definition. She goes from believing that boys and girls are from different worlds to developing an interest in boys and wanting to be loved and touched and noticed by them. However, she becomes more aware of her sexuality through multiple events. She wears high heels, she gets attention from boys, and she's being kissed during her first job, and through these experiences, she realizes the sexuality of women, and as she becomes more aware, especially when after she is raped, she realizes that this isn't what she expected. As she befriends Sally, she desires to be like her, and to gain the attention from boys and to be noticed by them, and she realizes that it isn't what she expected, and she realizes that she is not ready to grow up, and she doesn't want to be like Sally. She also matures in a sense that her perspective on Mango Street shifts. Throughout most of the novel, she reveals her story through her observations of Mango Street, but there's also this resentment that she has towards it. However, these observations turned stories about Mango Street that she shares with the reader soon become a part of her as she realizes that Mango Street is where she comes from. It is where she belongs. It is part of her story. And as she learns to appreciate this place and to accept it, Esperanza develops this sense of responsibility that she didn't have before for her family and those on Mango Street. She had always kind of had this kind of disconnect, this detachment, like she was almost superior to them, and she felt like she didn't belong with them, that she had more potential for her life. And as she develops this sense of responsibility, she decides that not only will she leave as she had always planned, but she would come back for those she had left behind and for those who have no way out. She sees the woman in the windows, the people who live in her neighborhood, and she feels for them. She felt trapped living on Mango Street, and she wants to come back and free them from that. Esperanza also develops this passion for writing. This whole novel is kind of this development of her writing her stories, and she realizes that through her writing, she is able to escape Mango Street, even if only leaving it emotionally. She realized many things on Mango Street, and taught her to turn away from using sex as a means of escape, like Sally. Instead, she turned to her writing as a form of escape, especially this being a Bildungsroman or coming-of-age novel. Esperanza's main conflict as she grows up into a young woman and as she matures is that she is struggling to find herself, struggling to find her identity. She encounters different kinds of identity, whether it be in her sexuality or through her name, and she kind of becomes confused with who she is and how is she supposed to identify herself. Sally is another important character in the novel. She's an essential part of Esperanza's life and the maturing process that she goes through and those experiences. Sally is described by Esperanza to be a very beautiful girl whom all the boys pay attention to. She has eyes like Cleopatra, it says. Esperanza also hopes to befriend her. However, although people may have seen Sally's beauty as appealing and attractive, her father didn't see it this way. He didn't have the same opinion. Because of his past experiences with his sisters, her father found that Sally's beauty was dangerous, and so he kind of locked her up out of the fear that she would one day have the same fate as his sisters, who fell in love and ran away because of that. His fear not only did that, but it led him to be an abusive father. It led him to beat his daughter to the point where he didn't even remember that Sally was his daughter. And this happened when she spoke to boys. She also chose not to share this part of her life with those around her, despite the evidence on her body. And I think kind of by this bottling up of this emotion, this pain that she felt, this lack of love, her abusive home life led her to find comfort in other things, to turn to sex as a means of this kind of love and as a means of escape. Sally, I think, also as she abusive father, there we go. Also, and comfort and love and sex. Also, I think Sally is a character in this novel who grows up very fast as she becomes more exposed to the effects of her beauty and how people respond to that. She matures sexually, and we realize that maybe she isn't as innocent as Esperanza thought her to be. In the monkey garden, when the boys steal her keys, they ask for a kiss in order for her to have them back. And she eventually kisses them just like that. It's a simple kiss, she says. And Esperanza is shocked by this. Esperanza is very different from Sally in the sense that in the market garden, she only wants to run around with the other kids. She still wants to play, while Sally is already matured far more than Esperanza has sexually. Sally also puts Esperanza in danger at the carnival where she is raped by a group of boys while waiting for Sally where she told her to. Sally also gets married to an older man before the 8th grade. And this young marriage can be seen also as a means of escape, like she turned to sex for, as a means of escape from her abusive father. And because of Sally's home life, because of her upbringing, with no love and care that she could tangibly feel, it led her to find love in other places, to turn to sex, to turn to this young marriage to a man she probably didn't even know. And I think Sally was similar to Esperanza in the fact that they both felt trapped on Mango Street. However, they reacted in different ways. While Sally turned to comfort in sex, Esperanza wanted to be like her and did the same, but she realized that it wasn't at all what she wanted, which is different from how Sally reacted. And I think Sally's desire to be free from that led her to seek comfort in sex, to be free from her abusive relationship with her father. I think what also led Sally to be different from Esperanza, because they were the same in the sense that they both felt trapped on Mango Street for different reasons, but they both felt this lack of freedom, and I think Sally kind of bottled up these emotions, as seen through her not telling people that her father was abusing her, and because she kind of bottled that up, it led her to react in a more extreme way than Esperanza probably did, led her to not be afraid to grow up so quickly. And also because I think of the abuse from her father, she lost her innocence earlier on, maybe, than Esperanza did. And she didn't have the same thing that Esperanza did. Esperanza didn't necessarily bottle up these things. By finding a passion in her writing, she was able to express herself through that. And similar to the things they carried, her writing was kind of a way for her to cope. Nenny, or Magdalena, I think is another important character in this novel. She is Esperanza's sister. She's also a young Latina, and she's also friends with Lucy and Rachel, just like Esperanza. Esperanza feels this sense of responsibility towards her sister, despite the fact that she finds her annoying. She feels a responsibility to take care of her and to protect her, especially Nenny being her only sister. In addition to this responsibility, Nenny and Esperanza also have a very special connection. And this can be seen in the chapter Laughter. Esperanza talks about how her and Nenny don't really look alike, but they're similar in other ways, not necessarily in their appearances. One thing being their laughter. She also describes a specific moment when the two see a house and they both think that it looks like Mexico. Although other people wouldn't understand, the two know what they're talking about. And that's kind of that similarity in the way they think also. Nenny also embodies innocence in the novel, which leads her, I think, to have a great imagination and also to be very independent. And this isn't a picture of Nenny on the side, but I thought it kind of showed a young girl and kind of this kind of like imagination idea. And this is kind of seen in the chapter Hips, when Lucy, Rachel, and Esperanza and Nenny are they're singing lyrics to songs as they jump rope. And Lucy, Rachel, and Esperanza make new lyrics for the songs, while Nenny sings the lyrics of an old song. And despite Esperanza trying to stop her and tell her and try to convince her that that's not what they're supposed to be doing, Esperanza describes the situation and says that Nenny is too many light years away in a world we don't belong anymore. And this kind of suggests this imagination that she has, and this independence as a part of her character. This independence that she kind of tries to make things her own, and she doesn't care about what's like right and what's correct, what needs to be done a certain way, like Esperanza cares, and she's strong in her independence. And I think their interactions on Mango Street, Nenny and Esperanza have very different views on that, as Esperanza desires to be far away and to kind of disconnect herself from Mango Street, while Nenny finds a way to make things her own, and she's okay with that. But I think Nenny's innocence that allows her to be more imaginative sets her apart from her sister Esperanza, in the sense that she doesn't see these shortcomings that the house on Mango Street has. Well, Esperanza has all these dreams for what she thought their home would be like. Nenny doesn't really see this. She's okay with it. Her imagination allows her to make things how she wants to see them. And even though Nenny may not want to leave Mango Street like Esperanza does, her imagination allows her to do that anyways, and allow to see things in a way that she'd want to see them, rather than the reality that it is maybe something that she wouldn't like Esperanza sees it. And now we move on to conflicts. So I think one of the first conflicts in the novel is this struggle with identity and belonging. In this Bildungsroman, Esperanza goes on a quest for self-definition, finding herself as she goes on this journey to become an adult, as she grows up, a coming of age. And she comes into conflict with this. She's going through puberty, and she experiences many insecurities and struggles as she tries to find where she belongs and who she is. She goes through many shifts and changes as well, which create this kind of tension and conflict. She shifts from being friends with Lucy and Rachel to Sally in an effort to be more mature, just like her. As she begins to have hips, she enjoys the attention of boys, develops feelings for them. She finds herself wanting to grow up faster and befriend Sally. She has these expectations for what adulthood is like, what it is like to be a woman, and have attention from guys and stuff. And however, she has this realization that it is not at all what she wanted, is not what she expected. And again, this failed expectations idea that she also experiences with the house on Mango Street. It isn't the house that she'd expected, not the house she wanted. And in this sense, her expectations of sex, her expectations of love, that she kind of thought she would get from being friends with Sally, it's not at all what she expected, especially realizing this after she is raped at the carnival in the chapter Red Clowns. And so Esperanza kind of struggles with finding her identity and finding where she belongs as she becomes a young woman. And she doesn't know how to define herself. She doesn't know if she's supposed to define herself through her name, as she becomes more aware of her sexuality, if she's supposed to define herself through people paying attention to her, through if she's loved by boys, by men. And as she goes through this maturing process and she develops insecurities, she comes to see the realities of adulthood, and she doesn't like what she found. And as she tries to define herself, find out who she is, she comes across many conflicts. And she struggles to also come to terms with where she belongs. She struggles to come to terms with and accept that she's from Mango Street, that it's where she belongs, it's where she comes from. And she experiences other insecurities as well, which are tied to her identity, like her economic status, how her family can't afford the home that they've dreamed of, and she can't, and also in her embarrassment from her old brown saddle shoes. This is kind of one of the main central internal conflicts in the novel, an internal conflict within Esperanza, especially it being a Bildungsroman as she becomes a young woman, her struggle to find herself, struggle to find her identity, where she belongs, and the conflict in that, and especially as she meets Sally, realizes new things, she becomes very confused in what direction to turn, where to find her identity, especially having insecurities along the way. I think another conflict in this novel is a sense of feeling trapped versus freedom. Esperanza kind of struggles with feeling stuck, feeling trapped in Mango Street, a place where she doesn't believe she belongs, and there's this desire to be free that comes from that. Specifically in the chapter Boys and Girls, Esperanza describes herself as a red balloon, a balloon tied to an anchor. And I think this suggests that she is a balloon in nature, a balloon wanting to be free. But this anchor, Mango Street, this place, it is weighing her down and she feels an inability to be free. And as she grows up in the novel on Mango Street, although she wishes to leave and be free from it, she discovers a passion in writing and finds freedom and relief through her writings, where she can escape Mango Street, if only emotionally. Another big thing about this conflict is women. Women in this story are often trapped in their homes because of their husbands, because of their circumstances, which possibly suggests how Esperanza feels and fears for her future. She can relate to these women who feel trapped in their homes, just how she feels trapped on Mango Street. And as Esperanza matures, she develops a sense of responsibility for these people. And she decides that not only will she leave, but she will return to help those who feel trapped, to help those who cannot get out and cannot have freedom. Another important part of this conflict that kind of connects to the greater themes of the novel is that Esperanza didn't feel like she belonged in this community. She didn't feel like she belonged with the people on Mango Street. But as she observed these women, she realized that there were people just like her, people who shared the same feelings, people who felt trapped and desired to be free. And she could realize that she does belong here. And that this is a part of her and there are people like her. And she then takes on that responsibility to come back after she has left for those people who are just like her. So this conflict that Esperanza faces and the woman face is mainly about the struggle caused by their circumstances of the society. But Esperanza chooses to go above and beyond and take up the role to help the women who share similar feelings to her, who feel trapped and desire to be free. The setting. So the house on Mango Street is set in Chicago, specifically in a low-income Latino neighborhood with a primary focus on Mango Street. And this is where Esperanza and her family lives. Esperanza and her family moved around frequently before moving to Mango Street. And the stories told from Esperanza's perspective take place in various places of the neighborhood of Mango Street, but rarely ever in the actual house on Mango Street, despite the title of the novel itself. Some of these places include the Monkey Garden, the canteen, Esperanza's school, among other places. And I think that Cisneros uses this variety of places in the neighborhood and puts them together to make up the setting to reveal this idea that the entire community of Mango Street, not just the house itself, becomes a part of Esperanza, that becomes a part of her home. And it's the entire community itself that makes up the home that she comes from, the home that she belongs, that she learns to accept in the end. Symbols and motifs. So one of the first symbols in the novel are high heels. So Lucy, Rachel, and Esperanza, they receive these high heels from the family of Little Feet. And when they wear them, they realize that they attract the attention of men on the street, specifically this bum that tries to kiss Rachel. And they're also warned of the dangers and not to wear them by Mr. Benny. The high heels in the novel kind of stand for this symbol of sex as they transform the girl's legs from scarred legs to long legs. It specifically says in the novel that they were legs covered in scars where scabs were picked. And then they were transformed into the long legs of a woman that are good to look at. The girls at first find themselves pleased with how they look in the heels. But after the incident with the bum, Esperanza has this realization and she makes the connection between the heels and the sex, realizing that the heels aren't as great as they first thought. The three girls later, after the heels are thrown away, they don't complain. Similar to her experience with sex, she realizes that these heels aren't as great as she first thought, just as sex wasn't as great as she first thought. Esperanza was also made aware of her sexuality for the first time in this incident with the heels. And as she starts to understand this and the heels' connection to sex, she realizes that she's not ready to grow up, as she may have thought she was. The heels also act as this kind of transition from innocence or childhood to maturity and adulthood, as their legs transform from the legs of a child with bruises and cuts to the long legs of a woman that are good to look at. Another important symbol in the novel are trees. This idea is referenced in the chapter 4, Skinny Trees, where Esperanza compares herself to these trees. She sees the trees as a symbol of herself, with skinny necks and pointy elbows. She sees these trees as out of place, similar to herself. Trees that were planted by the city in a place where they stand, but not necessarily where they belong, similar to how Esperanza feels on Mango Street, out of place. She finds herself able to relate with these trees because of their similarity. She feels that she understands the trees and that they understand her. She can see herself in these trees, and that is why they are a symbol of herself. She also observes that despite the fact that they do not belong, they persevere. They grow through the concrete. They reach and they continue to grow despite the fact that it isn't where they belong, similar to how she feels on Mango Street. Um, the trees also stand as this kind of symbol of strength through these trials, through their growth through the concrete, through the trials, despite the fact that they may appear weak because they are skinny. And Esperanza kind of goes through the same thing, and she sees the trees also as a reminder or an inspiration to keep being, to keep existing, even though she feels like she doesn't belong. The trees persevere to grow despite concrete, they continue to reach, and that inspires Esperanza to keep living, to keep going. They symbolize her struggle on Mango Street, feeling like she doesn't belong, but they remind her to persevere through that and to push through the concrete, to push through the trials. Not only do they remind her physically of herself, but internally through their emotions. And finally, themes. One of the important themes in the novel, I think, is this struggle with identity. This also serves as one of the main conflicts in the novel as Esperanza struggles to find herself, to define herself. As this is a Bildungsroman or coming-of-age novel, Esperanza goes through puberty. She moves to a new home, and she struggles to find herself, especially being in a place that she doesn't believe is her home, a place that she doesn't believe she belongs or can call home. She also experiences some shifts in her perception of what identity is throughout the novel, from things like believing it comes from her name, a name that she didn't like, to her sexuality as she became more aware of it through the high heels, through her first job, through being raped. And she matures, she grows, and she experiences this sort of loss of innocence that are factors in changing how she defined herself. She also had some realizations in the sexualization of women through events like the heels, the rape, and she comes to realize that she doesn't want to find her identity in whether or not boys like her, and she becomes confused multiple times as to who she wants to be and where she's supposed to base her identity on. As she continues to go through this process of maturing, she begins to accept Mango Street as she begins to write stories, as she observes the people of Mango Street, and she finds a new identity in her writing. Not in sex, not in boys, not in her sexuality as a woman, but in her writing. And Cisnero uses this theme, this struggle with her identity, to reveal these ideas that one's identity shouldn't be found in other people or in one's appearance, but rather from within themselves, in the strengths that they already possess. It should not be found also in something one is not ready for, as Esperanza discovered she wasn't ready for. She tries to find her identity in something that is more about the other people than about herself, and she forces herself to grow up in order to fit that identity that she thought she wanted. However, as I said before, she came to the realizations that she didn't want that to be who she was. She didn't want to find her identity in those things as she saw Sally did. And she began to see, as she accepted Mango Street as her home, that she already had something that could define her. And she found true comfort in her newfound identity in her writing, one that was already a part of her from the start, that she learned to strengthen and become passionate about. And also, through her writing, she became more observant of the people in her community and began to understand the people's struggles, ones that she could relate to, and this led her to develop a sense of responsibility for the people. Not only did she find her identity through the struggle, but also she decided that she would one day come back for the people she will leave behind on Mango Street, and realized that maybe she did belong there so that she could help those who weren't able to help themselves. I think another important theme in this novel is innocence and sexuality. Again, as this is a Bildungsroman coming-of-age novel, the children, or the girls in this novel specifically, undergo this maturing process, specifically Esperanza. And despite the fact that they will grow up in innocence, there is a point in their lives where the sexuality of women and the realization of this will lead to the loss of their innocence, as it did to Esperanza. And through this process, as they go through puberty, Esperanza realized that there were things about herself that made her feel good, about her sexuality. She found that high heels made her legs look longer, and they were nice to look at. She realized that she could attract the attention of men because of her sexuality. However, she soon saw the reality of this situation, and she didn't like what she saw. She became more aware of her sexuality, and she didn't know if she was ready for the effects of becoming a young woman and the sexuality that came with that. I think that Cisneros uses Esperanza's experiences from her transition to adulthood, from innocence to sexuality, to reveal this harsh reality of the sexuality of women, and how there's a sort of almost forceful loss of innocence that many young girls experience. After Esperanza is raped, she realizes that her sexuality, what comes from it, is not at all what she had expected, and it's not something that she's ready for. Again, like I said before, I think that as Esperanza realizes this and kind of shifts away from that identity of her sexualization to her writing, unlike Sally, Cisneros also uses this to show that one can choose not to exercise their sexuality as a woman and stop letting others control them, and to take back that control and to exercise one's own independence as a woman. She argues that women have an option not to give in to men's needs, not give in to the effects of their sexuality. And although they may never be able to gain their innocence back once it has been lost, Cisneros encourages women to take back their control, to take control of their sexuality and what comes from that. After one loses their innocence, there's no need to give up. Esperanza shows that even after she's raped, even after she's lost her innocence, she can find her identity in other things, and she can take back her control, take back her independence, and she chooses to take control over giving in to one's sexuality.